applying what we did 2 slides ago to what we just to what we did to the Stacy diagram. Again, if the requirements and technology are known, simple. But if the communications are complex, you're going to use Agile. And again, the goal here is to move counterclockwise and take things from the complex and bring it down to the simple. And so it works the same way pretty much on the Cynefin picture as it does on the Stacy diagram. But there's one more thing I like about this picture, and I sort of alluded to it in one of the previous slides about the management consultants live down here in the simple corner, or even the good practice corner. And since we're management consultants, we also help create chaos. I have another picture that shows sort of where these two groups live. And so this is probably one of the key differences between people who are Agile purists and people who are management consultants. Agile purists will view all management as evil. And yet they use pictures that come from management consulting in order to try to explain what they do. But what I realized looking at this picture, and it actually works, I guess we could turn it and do it the same way on the Stacy diagram, but it worked especially well here, is because the Agilists primarily work with chaos, complexity, and complicated things and use Agile to distill it down to either emerging practice or good practice or whatever. The management consultants, on the other hand, their bread and butter, like I said earlier, is best practice. They own that corner, and that corner lives in the C-suite. The other 3 boxes, the executives delegate that out. And they say, okay, you guys come up with the solution. Okay. And so for the Agile purists, this is an either-or situation. For me, I look at this and I go, no, it's a both-and situation. To really deliver the value that a customer and client needs, you need to know when to wear your Agile hat, and you need to know when to wear your management consulting hat. I know that this was a little bit of a segue away from vision momentarily, but I wanted to especially go through the Stacy diagram because that's going to bring us back into how we look at anticipatory vision. By the way, the communications calculator has been around for a very long time. The formula is n times n minus 1 divided by 2. And so if you have, for example, 440 stakeholders, the n is equal to 440, so it's 440 times 439 divided by 2. That gives you 96,000 channels. If you have 38 people or stakeholders on your committee and you put that in there for n, then it's 38 times 37 divided by 2 equals 703 channels. Now, this is from an actual case that I worked with. You'll find this one in our book Flow, and it's the Singtel example, where in this project it was just the gridlock was unbelievable, and the communications became extremely complex due to the number of potential channels. So it just created an incredible amount of noise. So one of the first things I did with the senior vice president there at Singtel was say, hey, this isn't going to work. You can't have 440 people involved in this project. We need to reduce the number of stakeholders to 40, and that reduced the number of channels from 96,000 down to 780. And so we reduced the number of stakeholders by 91%, which resulted in a 99% reduction in channels, which basically resulted in a 99% reduction in noise. And we handled the other 400 by just saying, hey, you're going to get a newsletter. And if you have any concerns about that or anything that is troubling you or whatever, please reach out to our team first. If we're not able to answer your questions satisfactorily, we'll be happy to refer you over to the Senior Vice President and you can chat with him. And so we've started sending out the newsletter. And then for the steering committee, we had 4-hour shouting matches every Friday. And I told the senior VP, this isn't going to work. I said, we're never going to get anything done. So I asked them again, I said, can we reduce this down to a team of 8, knowing that a really good team size is between 7 and 9 people for that type of group. And he's like, no, I really need these 12. So it's like, okay, compromised a little bit. So we went from 38 down to 12, which was a 2/3 reduction, a little bit over 68% reduction in stakeholders. And it created, because of the reduction in channels, it created a 91% reduction in channels. And it ended up that that reduced the noise for that steering committee by 91%. The meeting times went from 4 hours every Friday down to 2. And it even got even less than that as time moved forward. And those other 26 people were included in that 40 stakeholders group. So they got moved over there, and they were part of the original 440 anyways. But you get the idea. The communications calculator is a way to show the complexity of your channels of communication. And then it just gets more and more complicated because you can have this both internal and then external to other vendors and suppliers, and then it can become very complicated very quickly. And this goes all the way back to the Stacy diagram and the Knevin diagram that showed that you can have simple requirements, simple technology, but if the communications are complex, then you need to use agile methods, agile techniques, agile tactics, and using the agile mindset to get things done. And so if you have complicated communications, you need to be able to show that to your stakeholders and say, okay, this is why we need to use agile everywhere that we can. You're going to see we love to quote different business leaders, and we quote different books in our books. And Warren Buffett just has this beautiful quote: business schools reward difficult, complex behavior more than simple behavior. But simple behavior is more effective. And we'll talk about that when we look at the Knevin diagram or the Stacy matrix. And when we look at those two, keep this in mind, because when you're talking about total chaos, and you're going to be using completely novel practices to try to solve that, versus complex, where you're probably going to be using emerging practices, versus complicated, where you're going to be using good practice, versus simple, where you're best practice. And this is where management consultants are eating the agile coaches' lunches, because the agile coaches don't get even though it's right in front of their face, they don't seem to understand that management consultants make their money by simplifying things for organizations where human nature is to make it overly complex, to over-engineer it. And that doesn't do any good for anybody. And that's why the whole practice of management consulting has emerged, is because really sharp people recognize that, hey, there's patterns here, and we can turn those patterns into best practices. The Agilists believe they're the ones that came up with pattern recognition. Sorry, guys, you didn't come up with it. It's been around for a long time. Even in World War II, my dad was a code breaker. He was a cryptographer. He taught us that there are patterns in everything, 6 degrees of separation, all of those cool things. And if you simplify things, you will be more effective, just like Warren Buffett says here. And that's actually what we did. We took the Unified Vision framework that we use in Flow, which is a combination of this triangle with vision in the middle, the 4D model, and the VSPT model. This captures a good portion of our framework. And we had this printed up on napkins, and we've actually passed those out in the past as sort of a fun thing for people to look at it and go, oh, yeah, it is that simple. Explained on a napkin and delivered to the enterprise. VSPT is vision, strategy, people, and tasks. The line in between the VSPT is the disconnect that exists in every organization. And the VSPT is one of your first definitions because you need to start with vision. You need to have your vision first. And so then you start adding people with knowledge. And so we used to call that business content on the right side of the triangle there. And then you need people with the tools and technology experience to be able to help with the definitions. And traditionally, the business side and the technology side, they didn't communicate so great. And so that's why distill is at the bottom of the triangle, is you need to distill agreement between those two sides. And then they can start to deliver what's going to be useful in the way of a product, service, or result to the organization. Driving is linking back to the vision for each iteration. Are we one step closer to achieving the vision? So each iteration has a goal and an objective that should link to getting the team one step closer to delivering the vision. So the relationships are, we used to call that communication. If the relationships aren't there and aren't maintained in such a way and they break, then the right and left side of the triangles fall flat. And that's also why we put relationships up with on the drive side, because we're always linking everything back to what we're doing with vision. And so this is something that you can start to use immediately tomorrow in your work. You can look at your product backlog and go, oh, does our product backlog encompass the entire vision of what we're doing with the team in this product, service, or result? Do we have distilled agreement between the business content experts and the team, the Scrum team that's actually delivering? So on the knowledge side, that's probably going to be your product owner if you're thinking Scrum. And if on the tools side, you're looking at the Scrum team. Up there in relationships, you've got the Scrum Master, the facilitator, who's keeping all of the communication going and making sure that the team delivers, that we're double checking against the vision and driving and continuously defining, distilling, and delivering in an iterative process. But this is a leadership framework that sits above Scrum, and we're going to show that on another slide a little bit later. So as I already mentioned on the napkin, we already talked about this, about the business side, the technology side, and the relationships side. And one more thing on this triangle, the idea with the definitions and distillation is to create a laser focus on what you're delivering. So when you're distilling, you're actually looking at the sprint backlog, and then when you're delivering, you're actually going through the iteration. When you do the review and retro, that's actually driving, and so it becomes a complete iterative process from a leadership perspective. As I mentioned, on the business side, you've got the product owners, obviously, but you're also going to have the managers, business stakeholders, and line managers, subject matter experts, things like that are going to come from the business side. On the technology side, you're going to have the developers, the architects, QA testing, all of the different parts that you're going to need. Engineering, depending on if you're actually making a physical product for hardware, software, things like that. That's all on the technology side. On the relationship side, you're going to have Scrum Masters, project managers, resource managers, other stakeholders like HR, and so on, depending on the situation. And in the middle of this triangle, we also have the spirit, and that's both for the individual and for the teams. I like this quote from Jeff Bezos. It's, Amazon is willing to plant seeds and let them grow. We're stubborn on vision and flexible on details. This is a really interesting quote, especially since many times from what I've heard about how Amazon is actually led and managed, is that there appears to be quite a bit of micromanagement all the way down to the individual level. And whether they're true or not, it's hard to say, but there are a lot of reports and information coming out of Amazon that would indicate that there is a high level of micromanagement occurring. If that is the case, then it would be interesting to hear Jeff's explanation on how they're stubborn on vision and yet still flexible on the details. If they're flexible, then would that mean that the workers in their warehouse, for example, that the workers can self-organize, do a pull system for the work instead of a push system for the work? And it would just be interesting to hear that kind of response from Jeff. But if this is true, this is a great statement because that's how it should be. The leaders should be stubborn on vision and the values and the purpose. Flexible on the details gets down to the management of the tasks. And so that's why I really like this statement, because it really reflects what we're trying to achieve with and in flow. The origin of VSPT is actually West Point Military Academy. First time Ted and I ran across this was in the 90s. And Newt Gingrich actually used this as one of their tools for aligning the entire Republican Party, the entire party apparatus, to line everybody up with a single vision of taking over Congress in, I think it was 96? I think it was 96. Or maybe it was for 94. Could have been already for 94, because I think they got it halfway through Clinton's first term, which turned into a nightmare for him because in his second term, we all know that he got impeached and fun things like that. So what was brilliant about this, and the original VSPT, was vision, strategy, projects, and tactics. Okay. What's interesting about this is not only was this used by West Point Military Academy, it was also used by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. Ted and I were on a project together in Helsinki, and we were presenting the foundations of flow. And when we got to VSPT, the people that we were presenting to, they were from a billing company that was based in Israel, or at least their headquarters was based in Israel. They were a worldwide company. And I remember the head of their team, he was like a lieutenant colonel general type thing in the IDF. He literally came up out of his chair, pounded the table, and demanded to know, where did you get this? And Ted staying calm, he looked at the lieutenant colonel, and he looked at him and he smiled and he said, "Well, probably the same place you got it. Have you ever read the Torah?" And the guy's eyes got really big and he sat down. Obviously, he had, since being Jewish, he had read the Torah. And this comes straight from there. And so he calmed down and realized that we hadn't been spying on the IDF because they use this framework for their elite forces. Okay? So this has a deep history, both militarily leadership and political leadership. And so Ted and I realized that, ooh, we can apply this in project management. But we had a slightly different version of VSPT. And at first we had vision, strategy, projects, and tasks. But then we realized over time that, well, actually it's not so much projects that are important, but people. And so it's the people and the tasks that they're doing that are most important. And are those people and tasks linked to the strategy and linked back to the vision? The line is still there because without fail, in every organization, there's a big disconnect. The thicker the line, the wider the line, the bigger the disconnect. And without exception, every organization with which we've ever worked has had that disconnect. I don't care who they are. I haven't seen a single one yet that hasn't had that disconnect. I can guarantee you, we can find it. So in the end, it boils down to the right people doing the right things at the right time, in the right way, that hopefully will deliver the right results, getting you one step closer to fulfilling your strategy and one step closer to fulfilling your vision. When you're struggling as an organization to deliver, I can guarantee you it's because there's a disconnect there and it needs to be explicitly addressed. If it's not explicitly addressed, it will just continue to fester there, creating confusion, underperformance, and friction. And primarily friction is what it's going to create because people will just get annoyed with each other. So our current version of VSPT is vision, strategy, people, and tasks.